Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Pace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, July the 8th, 2022. Well, today in Canada, I'm reminded of that line from one of my favorite films, Joe Dante's Gremlins 2, where the brain gremlin says, "Are there runs on the bank where you are? I'm advising my clients to put everything they've got into canned goods and shotguns." So I walk to the store, save on foods. I don't know, about a mile away, get some groceries. 7:30 this morning, and I noticed that one of the self-service checkouts said no debit. So I went back to the line, waited for another machine to open up, and I went there and I put in my $24 worth of groceries. And then when I attempted to pay, it said that this was not possible. So some employee of the store said, no, all of the machines, none of them are taking debit. And I said, they won't take cash? No, they won't take cash. But there is a cash lineup at till number 9. So I walked over to till number 9. There were 3 people in line in front of me, but one of them had a shopping cart which was overflowing a whole week's groceries. And okay, I was prepared to wait. And then I saw the cashier pick up her phone and call for a price check. And I thought, I'm out. So I dumped my groceries and left the store. And so I went to McDonald's and ordered a sausage McMuffin. And no, debit didn't work there. So then I went to 7-Eleven, and the debit didn't work there. So I came home and found out that the Interact system is down across Canada. The Interact system is the one that powers debits and debit payments, and also e-transfers of money across the internet. And why was Interact down? Well, because Rogers Communications was down. There are 3 telecoms in Canada that hold a monopoly, and they are Rogers, and they are Bell, and they are Shaw. Oh, yes, my smartphone is a brick now because, well, I didn't want to get a Rogers phone because they're not exactly touted for their service or reliability. So I went with one of the scrappy underdog phone companies, which is called Chatter. There's another one called Fido. Turns out that they're owned by Rogers Communications. And so Shaw, I have Shaw internet service, so my internet has been working. When Shaw announced its own mobile phone service, I attempted to join and was told, no, you can't because you don't have a credit card. And I thought, well, I still have my modem and service from you, and I don't have a credit card, but I don't know. I don't know why they make these decisions. Here is I should mention that Shaw is about to be gobbled up by Rogers. I've always had my internet through Shaw. They have a pretty good reputation, and it's a company based in Calgary in the West, as opposed to Rogers, which is based in Toronto. But here's Tom Warren and Richard Lawler from The Verge. Canadian telecom Rogers is suffering a major outage affecting landline phones, cellular connections, and internet connectivity throughout Canada that started earlier this morning. Down Detector listed thousands of reports for the issues that flooded in as people started to get up around 5 a.m. Eastern Time and couldn't get online. Rogers first addressed the outage in a tweet from its official support account just before 9 a.m. ET, and then went silent for a couple of hours. On Friday afternoon, the company tweeted that its technical teams are working to restore services alongside our global technology partners and are making progress. There is still no ETA for restoration, even after services have been unavailable for 12 hours nationwide. In a follow-up tweet, the company promised that it would be proactively crediting all customers and said that it had every technical resource and partner working on getting its network back up. It's good to know. So there's a graph here, the Cloudflare radar graph, showing the traffic change to and from Rogers dropping to 0 at approximately, I'd say just before 8 o'clock. Cloudflare radar shows communications between its load-sharing network and Rogers in Canada exhibiting its normal nightly pattern before dropping to essentially 0 at about 3 to 4 a.m. ET and registering a flat line ever since. At that same time, there was a massive spike in Border Gateway Patrol announcements for the network that indicate changes in routing. In a blog post published Friday afternoon, Cloudflare personnel speculated that the outage is the result of an internal error at Rogers, as opposed to a cyber attack or other cause. They cited that pattern of BGP announcements, noting that with the Rogers network now failing to announce its presence, the rest of the internet can't find it. BGP is a fundamental part of the technology that helps move information from one place on the internet to another. And a problem with BGP routing information was the cause of a massive Facebook network outage last fall. Someone has suggested that the reason for this crash and the subsequent or concomitant fragging of Interac was a network update that went bad. And I thought, if any of you know about this, perhaps you can help me out. Don't they make backups of their pre-existing setup before they improve it? Now, I understand the amount of data involved would be huge, but if they don't make backups, then any improvement update that goes kablooey is going to be catastrophic. The outage has also disconnected Interac, the network Canadian banks use, disabling debit cards, ATMs, and the e-transfer services that recently notched over 1 billion transactions in 1 year. Passport offices and Canada's tax collecting revenue agency are among the government services that are unavailable today due to the outage. Both agencies also warned users the outage is cutting off multi-factor authentication codes sent by voice or text message, so people who logged out may not be able to log in at this time. Even the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, or the CRTC, which regulates broadcasting and telecoms, says its phones aren't working due to the outage. Internet Network Disruption Tracker NetBlocks shared real-time data showing Canada's national connectivity has dropped to just 75% of its normal levels. A report by CBC News noted Rogers subsidiary Fido is having problems too. The article says problems have affected card payment processing at ATMs across Canada. A CBC radio station in Kitchener, Ontario is also offline, and some telephone services for Ottawa's transit agency have been knocked out. Pictures from Toronto show people crammed into coffee shops or heading to the library to access Wi-Fi now that their other options are offline. So, yes, bigger is better. This is how it works in Canada. You get relentless consolidation until a company is deemed too big to fail. So must be supported by the government. Has to be supported by the government, because it would be catastrophic if, we're supposed to have anti-monopoly protection in Canada, but this has just been waved off for decades. Now, as one might imagine, I went to my bank and stood in a rather lengthy line to get cash. Cash is king, as people are saying today. And my bank, Van City, which I chose some years ago because it was staffed by nice middle-aged white ladies, it's changed. It is alphabet people, alphabet people, alphabet people. Pride, pride, pride. There's a rainbow carpet in front of 2 sitting chairs there. The teller who gave me my money had a pride button on, and there's just pride everywhere in there. Oh, Interac, by the way, if you go to their page, guess what? there's the rainbow flag. And today has made rather a mockery of how they describe themselves on Twitter. When you're in control of your money, it's easier to make the most out of life. So let's find the latest from Interac. 51 minutes ago, due to the continued nationwide Rogers outage of business and consumer network services, Interac Debit and Interac e-Transfer continue to be unavailable across Canada. Rogers communicated they are making progress on a resolution, and once they restore a pathway to our services, it will allow us to work with our partners to bring our services back online. We are in close contact with Rogers and will share more information as it becomes available. Oh, they're making progress on a resolution. What else are they going to say? We're throwing up our hands because we have no idea what happened and no idea how to fix it. No, they're not going to say that, are they? Various people have speculated perhaps this is controlled. Perhaps this is an experiment. Because if one's ability to get money depends on a single system whose infrastructure is housed on a monopoly's servers, well, it would be pretty easy for the federal government, say, to install a kill switch. Let's see what happens when Canadians can't get their money. I'm not saying that this is happening, but we've been hearing some pretty strange things about the Canadian government. Well, true things about them hacking our phones and recording us through our phones and through internet cameras like the one there and internet microphones like the one here. Also, that it turned out that the Canadian government was tracking everyone with a smartphone during COVID. Where are they going? Yeah, they're leaving their houses, apartments, and where are they going to? Oh, yes, the data was all anonymized and there were no names attached to it. Yeah, sure. Sure, there weren't. Perhaps this is the future, where these over complex systems begin to collapse one by one. And let's see what's the latest from Rogers. Just let me check that out here. I'm hoping that this disruption is going to put paid to Rogers swallowing Shaw Communications. Oh, the latest communication from Rogers is an hour ago. We acknowledge the impact our outage is having on your life. We have every technical resource and partner fully deployed to solve the problem. As soon as we know the specific time the networks will be fully operational, we will share that with you. Right now, we are focused on the solution. Some of our customers have raised the question of credits, and of course, we will be proactively crediting all customers and will share more information soon. Well, that's good to know, isn't it? So, Rogers, let's find out a little bit more about Rogers. According to Wiki, it's a Canadian communications and media company operating primarily in the fields of wireless communications, cable television, telephony, and internet, with significant additional telecommunications and mass media assets. It's headquartered in Toronto, Ontario. The company traces its origins in 1925 when Edward S. Rogers Sr. founded Rogers Vacuum Tube Company to sell batteryless radios, although this present enterprise dates to 1960 when Ted Rogers and a partner acquired the CHFI-FM radio station. Yes, and Rogers owns the Toronto Blue Jays and the stadium they play in and the broadcasting of Toronto Blue Jays games on their sports network, Rogers Sportsnet. And they are a very powerful company in my country. And I guess they are intent on becoming ever more powerful. They used to own a whole host of magazines, the former McLean Hunter magazines, which they got rid of. But yes, bigger, 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 bigger. This is the Canadian way, as I said. Rogers Communication, let's see, 26,000 employees, $14 billion in revenue. The year ended December 2020. Total assets, $39 billion. I mean, that doesn't sound like a lot, you understand, to Americans, but keep in mind that Canada is a country of only 38 million people. But what are people are saying? What are they saying about Interact? You know, again, don't want to be too conspiratorial, but in Michel Houellebecq's novel Submission, which is about a Muslim takeover of France, the riots in France, the Muslim-led riots in France, the Intifada, if you will, are completely out of control, and the country is headed into crisis, which ends, as previously mentioned, with a Muslim takeover of the French government. The government simply decides to shut down all communications, television, radio, internet, and I have no doubt that they can do that if they want to. Uh, but let's see what people, of course, there's a lot of people who are quite upset about this. Yes, here come the 70s, says social credit coming back to BC, but it's not Wacky Bennett's version. W.A.C. Bennett was premier of British Columbia from 1952 to 1972, and he ran under the Social Credit Party. Just as in Alberta, the actual social credit policies of what was his name? Major, I've forgotten his name, some major, they were dumped pretty quickly. But the Social Credit Party ran Alberta for what, 40 years, close to 40 years? Yeah. So this is what happens when you have too much complexity, that your systems are fragile. And again, it could be as easy as people are speculating for a network update to frag the system. And then, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what do we do? Someone had suggested I could just use a credit card, to buy my groceries. But as previously mentioned, I don't have a credit card. I haven't had a credit card except for prepaid credit cards for, 20 years, almost 20 years. I've had two unpleasant experiences with credit cards, which persuaded me, finally and definitively, that it is not a good idea for me to spend money I don't have. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Ann Run and to Brian Frakes, who says, howdy, you made it. Oscar Toe says, the Red Shoes was fantastic. Wish I could see it in a theater. I suppose that's the best option, but the Red Shoes has been released on Criterion on 4K, and you get one of these latest generation 4K TV screens. If it's big enough, it's pretty much like going to the theater, perhaps in some ways even better. Hello to Ann Run. When have you last eaten? Kevin, I managed to pay cash. Luckily, I had about $20 in my wallet, so I managed to get some food from 7-Eleven at about 8 o'clock this morning. Hello to Gamion. And yes, Brian Frake says, what a fragile little world we live in. Hello to Mercurius Olycus and Oscar Toe. Dan Anran says, not saying this applies to you, but this is a common complaint of younger people watching old movies. They move too slowly for their short attention spans. Well, in The Red Shoes, there is a set piece, a ballet, a supernatural ballet that lasts 15 minutes. I suspect, I find it awesome myself, but I suspect younger people will be complaining about the lack of explosions. Tarot Destroyer says the claim and exercise of a constitutional right cannot be converted into a crime, quoting Miller versus U.S. Well, here's another thing about old movies. Where are the smartphones? Where are the computers? Where are the Bluetooths? Where are the earbud headphones? Why is everyone dressed so strangely? Why do they speak so formally? It's a lack of historical consciousness, as John Lukács called it. Effectively, I would say that Zoomers, to give one example, they cannot understand and are not willing to try to understand, as a rule, anything since before to the year 2000, or maybe even 2010. Hello to, who else do we have here? The first bird attack in Hitchcock's The Birds happened 45 minutes into the film, says Taro Destroyer. Chokin666 says, have you tried switching your life on and off and then on again? Yes, that's the repeated joke from the IT crowd, which eventually they dumped because it was their catchphrase, but everyone was sick of it. If you're curious, Olika says, nice to be at a place where I'm not going to get warnings from management for offensive opinions. David the Gnome, hello, says Canadians just barter for goods. They can trade jugs of maple syrup and rainbow flag DVDs of Kids in the Hall for essential services. Yes, Oscar Toe mentions the ballet sequence. To me, it is the mark of an outstanding movie when it depicts, say, an activity or people that I don't like. I don't like ballet. I think it's an opera divertissement that got too big for its capizios. A little ballet joke for you there. But in this, in the ballet sequence, the set piece in the red shoes, watching this, and I've seen the movie many times, if ballet dancers could fly, or if they were capable of transmogrification, yes, I would be a lot more attracted to a ballet. Anran says, how much longer will Justin Trudeau be Prime Minister of Canada? Well, he's got the deal with the Jagmeet Singh, which is supposed to last until what, 2024, 2025? I suppose the Liberal Party could, decide as they did with the caucus, could decide as they did with Boris Johnson in Britain, that they don't want him around anymore. But for all Trudeau's flaws, he is a known quantity. Everyone knows his name. People say, oh, what about Chrystia Freeland? She's ever so smart. People have not paid a lot of attention to Chrystia Freeland. And, if sufficient attention were paid to her fanatical devotion to her Nazi grandfather and her seeming desire to destroy Russia because of her fanatical devotion to her Nazi grandfather and her habit of showing Banderite symbols in parades, I don't know. That might be bad for her. Apart from the fact she speaks in a ridiculous little girl voice, despite being in her 50s, and insists she has this idea that she's some sort of sex pot and is continually dressing in clothes which are 2 sizes too small for her, as mentioned previously, giving her the look of a sausage about to burst its case. Problem glasses abound, says Dan. I'm sure that is a movie that really looks best on a big screen, says Anne. Well, again, if you're talking, they have TV screens that are 60, 65, 70 inches now. And obviously, if you're sitting close enough to them, you're getting the same kind of immersive experience that you would be in a movie theater. Hello to Dionysus. Do they have pride in their customer service? Asks me curious Olycus. It is a Technicolor, which gets mixed feelings, but I always liked it. Well, I love Technicolor. One of the reasons I love Technicolor is that it is not realistic. Those blues and reds and greens, they don't look like that in nature. But of course, there's a problem with Technicolor that the original, 3 strips, the films, they decayed and they could not be restored. So they had to, guess, using computers, guess what the colors look like, because nobody knows what the colors look like. people can say, oh, I saw that movie in the theater 60 years ago. Well, that's not reliable. When Hitchcock's Vertigo, another great Technicolor film, was being restored, some old car collector, had the same car in the same color that Jimmy Stewart was driving around San Francisco in. So the restorationists were able to use that as, I believe it was the green for the color, and then extrapolate as to what the red and blue would look like. Hello to Art Mob. Had enough of the alphabet people. Affirmative action was fine back in the 1980s. An old girlfriend of mine hated Technicolor, says Oscar Toe. Another difficulty, if you will, with Technicolor, which rather enhances its appeal to me, is that nothing is ever really in focus. Anren says, you find Technicolor too intense or saturated? Hello to G33K. Pride in everything but their jobs. Hello to William Hicks. Dionisa says, when I was a school teacher, they gave us all laptops, and when I used it at home, they would turn on their camera and spy on me. Hello to Quachalongo. I'd like a girlfriend who's a strict black and white cinephile, says Halper. Yes, young people, and I think we're going all the way to millennials, cannot bear black and white films. Oscar Toe says, I'm finished up watching the nearly 4-hour-long La Belle Noiseuse tonight. The mayor of Toronto has a significant interest in Rogers. Yes, John Tory, the fag end of the Canadian aristocracy. You know, he was determined to become Premier of Ontario, and I thought, you're Canada. Your family already owns Canada. Why do you need to be Premier? Of course, he failed miserably, and finally managed to find his level as mayor of Toronto. Anyone else that's new? Got a laugh out of Dabney Coleman giving Stanton a hard time at the start of their interview. Thanks. That's from Halper. Which movie is that, actually? Is everyone in the Pacific Northwest really stupid? Asked Chokakin 666. Well, given my experience in Vancouver, extensive, and Victoria, extensive, and my knowledge of Seattle, which used to be pretty extensive, and Portland, these are the dumbest white people on earth. Seriously, they are. They tend to be nice people, but oh, so dumb. Diva the Gnome says, KMG, I don't want to be too conspiratorial. Please do. My goodness, I wish more people would. Technicolor makes everything pop, says Yo Mama. Victoria Helen Stone, who asks, how can you tell if your girlfriend is ticklish? Yeah, okay, I'm not going to repeat that. Character, Kevin. Okay, that's the name of the movie. It is free on YouTube. Let's talk about the Netherlands. This is from a Twitter account called Rosie's Snake Oil. Dutch Anon breaks down what is really happening and what's at stake. The basic gestalt. The European Union and the World Economic Forum promote sustainable development goals, aka Agenda 2030. Part of the SDGs is the reduction of agricultural impact on climate change by means of nitrogen dioxide, or NO2 restrictions. Dutch government signs contracts promising to execute this agenda and proceeds implementing new laws restricting NO2 emissions from farms. Dutch farms, however, barely produce any such gases. Even the Dutch government statistics indicate 90% of the measured NO2 comes from Germany. NO2 is also a frail and unstable molecule that doesn't actually impact the local environment. Independent digital soldiers discovered the Tri-State City project in their efforts to find out why the Dutch government does this. Tri-State City is scheduled to be the complete bulldozing and rebuilding of the entire Benelux as one giant smart city, akin to the 90s movie Judge Dredd. Tri-State City is supposed to become the capital of the global homogenized one world government. This one world government needs all that Dutch farmland to build ghettos. The NO2 law is just a tool being used to completely decimate the Netherlands' Dutch culture and the Dutch way of life. Farmers share this information and quietly decline this law. Dutch government publicly threatens land expropriation by force if the farmers don't comply. Farmers organize tractor rallies and block highways. Farmers surround the home of the Minister of Agriculture. Farmers collaborate with other branches of the economy to organize a general strike and shutdown for Monday, the 4th of July. Dutch government debates the potential strike and say on public record that military violence may be used on the farmers if they attempt to shut down the Schiphol airport. In doing so, the Dutch government quietly declared itself enemy of the people and became strictly illegal under Admiralty law, for it has violated its corporate contract with the citizens of the nation. You are here. And finally, Dutch media reports nothing but angsty inconveniences. Again, this you can find this. I believe it's a Reddit post at a Twitter account called Rosie's Snake Oil. But Canada has its priorities, and even beyond the green struggle, which is when I was speaking of Bolshevism and Stalin the other day. This is what I'm going to call climate change from now on, climate emergency, whatever, climate extinction, etc. You used to have the class struggle, now you have the green struggle. And if it involves liquidation of certain classes, well, so be it, because climate struggle ideology demands it. But even perhaps above that, there is the Ukraine. This is from John Iveson at the National Post. Ottawa's bureaucratic machine wants a vacation. Ukraine still needs us. There seems to be a sense in government that Canada has done its bit and can rest on its laurels, but now it's crucial, says Ukraine's new ambassador to Canada. What would one expect the ambassador of the Ukraine to Canada to say? Iveson begins, the art of diplomacy is to express disquiet in the most gracious way possible. Yulia Kovalev, Ukraine's new ambassador to Canada, is not a career diplomat, but she is learning quickly. She said she is grateful for the military and humanitarian support extended to her embattled country, but she noted that the war in Ukraine will not take a vacation, unlike the bureaucracy in Ottawa. In an interview at the embassy, Kovalev noted a story from Lithuania where a local journalist launched a crowdfunding campaign to buy a Bayraktar TB2 drone to donate to the war effort in Ukraine. The campaign raised US $6 million in a matter of days, persuading the Turkish manufacturer to provide it for free. The ambassador said, we have the support of people throughout the world, but people have a quicker response than the bureaucracy. They feel the war is today, and the bureaucratic machine needs to feel this urgency. Sources on the front lines speak about the need to undertake risky reconnaissance missions on Russian positions because drones are being shot out of the sky quicker than they can be supplied. We can't wait for the ammo and the big guns, said Canadian Forces veteran James Challis in an email. Timing is everything. Defense Minister Anita Anand recently announced Canada will send 39 armored combat support vehicles and 6 additional surveillance cameras for Bayraktar drones. That will exhaust the $500 million of military aid from the 2022 budget. In addition, Canada has provided about $1.8 billion in financial support, one of the biggest bilateral contributors of loans and humanitarian assistance. Yes, I make that to be $2.3 billion poured down a rat hole. Iveson continues, there seems to be a sense in government that Canada has done its bit and can now rest on its laurels. This is not Kovalev's view. The scale of Ukraine's needs were revealed at a conference in Lugano, Switzerland this week, where Vladimir Zelensky's government released a recovery plan that will require $750 billion over the next decade. I wonder how much of that $750 billion will be poured into the pockets of the oligarchs or simply laundered and sent back to PR spivs and the like in the United States and other countries. Global development media platform DevEx estimates $100 billion has already been committed by the international community, although that includes military contributions. The Ukrainian government says it needs $60 billion immediately to cover a $5 billion a month budget deficit and emergency infrastructure repairs to replace housing, roads, bridges, and water mains destroyed by the Russians before winter comes. Longer term, housing costs are expected to take up about 1/3 of the $750 billion. Such has been the savage and indiscriminate nature of the Russian bombardment on civilian areas of Ukrainian cities. No, this is a lie. It has not been a savage and indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas in Ukraine by the Russians. Far, far from it. If you want to see savage and indiscriminate bombing, you should look at pictures from after the successful Russian campaign in Chechnya of what the capital city of Grozny, which means terrible, by the way, what it looked like. It was leveled. It was completely leveled. These people like Tyson, they lie and they lie and they lie. And we've already heard from the New York Times that, yes, use the noble lie. Lying is good because it beats Russia. Iverson continues, as an example of the maliciousness of the Russian invaders, the ambassador cited the fact that 90% of Ukraine's wind farms have been destroyed. Oh, dear. And solar farms were stolen to denude a renewable energy source and keep Ukraine dependent on Russian fossil fuels. Oh, no. Crimes against the green economy. I don't believe a single word of any Ukrainian claim. Not one. Not one single word. Everything, to paraphrase Mary McCarthy, when she was what she said about Lillian Hellman, everything they say is a lie. Every word they say is a lie, including and the. And they've been caught out over and over again, but it doesn't make any difference. Here in Soviet Kanakistan, this is from Dan Takima of CBC News, Tamara Lich's bail revoked, will remain in custody. Freedom Convoy leader Tamara Lich's bail has been revoked for violating the conditions of release when she attended an awards gala in Toronto and had contact with another convoy organizer. Justice of the Peace Paul Harris announced his decision in an Ontario Court of Justice courtroom in Ottawa Friday afternoon, with Lich present in person. Harris said her detention is necessary to maintain confidence in the administration of justice. Ms. Lich is not prepared to follow court orders and is prepared to do whatever she feels like doing. When Lich was asked if she understood the decision, she said yes, then thank you. Her next appearance is scheduled for July the 14th via video. Lich has been in jail since she was taken into custody in Medicine Hat, Alberta on June 27th after Ottawa police issued a Canada-wide warrant for her arrest. She faces charges of mischief, counseling mischief, obstructing police, counseling to obstruct police, counseling intimidation, and intimidation by blocking and obstructing one or more highways in relation to the protests that shut down parts of Ottawa for roughly 3 weeks this past winter. It did not shut down any parts of Ottawa. Speaking to reporters after the decision, defense lawyer Lawrence Greenspan said he was extremely disappointed and the defense will seek a bail review in the Superior Court of Ontario as quickly as possible. Supporters holding Canadian flags chanted "Free Tamara" in front of the courthouse after the decision. Zhao Wang called Lich a hero and compared COVID-19 lockdowns in China to conditions in Canada. Yeah, not that far away, actually. Tamara Lich is a political dissident, and the government has made it clear, well, the leading edge of Canada's government is its mainstream media, has made it clear that political dissidents will not be permitted. That anyone who is a dissident, who doesn't fall in with the Liberal NDP coalition, is an extreme right-winger, and extreme right-wingers don't have rights. More on that from Germany a little later. This is from the site 1945.com, Daniel Davis. Russia's brutal war in the Donbass proves Ukraine can't win. Methodical and relentless, Russia's war Donbass likely to continue through the summer. The General Staff of the Ukraine Armed Forces on Monday confirmed that President Vladimir Zelensky's troops have withdrawn from Lysychansk. In the face of Russia's superiority in artillery, aviation, MLRS, ammunition, and personnel, the General Staff reported the continuation of the defense of the city would lead to fatal consequences. The UAF, the General Staff spokesperson, continued, would nevertheless be back, and we will definitely win! Exclamation point. They are almost certainly wrong, however, and it is time to face an increasingly unavoidable reality. In all likelihood, the Ukrainian armed forces will continue to suffer loss after loss, surrendering more territory to the Russians. If Kyiv and the West continue ignoring combat reality long enough, Ukraine may suffer an outright military defeat. Based on the public statements by senior Kyiv and Washington leaders, however, one might be forgiven for thinking Ukraine was actually winning. U.S. retired General Ben Hodges said in late June that he is convinced that the Ukrainian army will be able to push the Russians back to their February 24th positions by the end of the year. Last Friday, Zelensky repeated that Ukrainian armed forces would continue fighting, saying that step by step we will drive Russia out of our sea, our land, and our sky. But that is almost the opposite of what is happening on the battlefield. Despite what the Ukrainian president and the American general say, there is no valid military basis on which to support the hope that Ukraine will win its war. Continue the situation that has unfolded in the eastern part of the country. As I outlined in detail at the outset of the Battle of Donbass in mid-April, Russia started with substantial advantages in manpower, tanks, personnel carriers, artillery rockets, and combat aviation. Russia has exploited its advantages over the past 2+ months, grinding down the Ukrainian defenders. Many in the West routinely describe Russia's progress as tiny advances and plotting, but when viewed over time, the more accurate terms should be methodical and relentless. Since April, Russia has captured major towns and cities such as Izium, Rubizhne, Kremnina, Popozna, Zoloto, Severodonetsk, and of Sunday, Lysychansk. In some ways, however, the biggest setback for Ukraine hasn't been the loss of territory so much as the loss of its best trained and experienced troops. Russia has been imposing up to 1,000 total Ukrainian casualties per day in the Donbass. Reports suggest that Ukrainian troops evacuated Severodonetsk and Lysychansk by rubber boats. Because the Ukrainian General Staff waited too late to order the evacuation, their forces left without their equipment, abandoning large quantities of tanks, personnel carriers, and most critically, artillery pieces. The sum total of all heavy weapons delivered or promised by the West to Ukraine has only been a small percentage of what's actually needed, but will not likely be enough to offset the substantial losses Ukraine suffered in its recent defeats, much less enable a counteroffensive in mere weeks from now. A senior Ukrainian military official admitted that even before the twin defeats in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, the UAF had lost approximately 50% of its pre-war stocks of heavy weapons. Even the arrival of a few modern Western rocket launchers will not come close to replacing these losses. Russia enjoys at least a 10-to-1 advantage in artillery and rocket ammunition and a dramatic advantage in air sorties over the Donbass. And the Ukrainian troops are able to hit, the Kremlin's troops are able to hit the Ukrainian troops with a far greater density of bombs. The New York Times reported last Tuesday that the artillery war in Ukraine's east is seemingly never ending, noting that, quote, the shelling is constant, wounding and killing and driving those soldiers cowering in trenches and foxholes slowly insane, unquote. Daniel Davis is a senior fellow for defense priorities and a former lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army who deployed into combat zones 4 times. He's the author of The 11th Hour in 2020 America. And who are the people who support the Ukraine? Well, I'm sure a lot of these Canadians who support the Ukraine, well, a lot of them are, Ukraine origin. Well, Ukraine origin going back to the time when people from Galicia were enticed to come to Canada roughly 120 years ago or so. This is from Moss Robeson at readpassage.com. For decades, Canada has underwritten the cultish worship of Ukrainian Nazi collaborator war criminals. The vandalism of a cenotaph in a Ukrainian cemetery in Oakville, Ontario, dedicated to Waffen SS veterans, became international news on July the 17th after David Pugliese of the Ottawa Citizen reported police were investigating the anti-Nazi graffiti as a hate-motivated offense. Many around the world were shocked to learn of the memorial's existence, yet this cenotaph isn't even the oldest memorial at that cemetery glorying Nazi collaborators. Canada is likely the only country in North America, if not the Western Hemisphere, with monuments dedicated to Waffen SS veterans. There are also arguably more problematic Ukrainian memorials in Canada that have received little attention in the press. Just a week after Puliese's troubling article, Progress Alberta reported that Edmonton Police's Hate Crimes Unit is investigating the December 2019 vandalism of a larger-than-life bust that had been graffitied with the words Nazi scum. Yesterday, the Canadian Jewish Record reported that police dismissed hate as a motivating factor in the vandalism. The bust was of Roman Shukevich, the commander of the Ukrainian insurgent army. There are at least a few memorials in Canada honoring the UPA, which had more Holocaust perpetrators in its midst than the Ukrainian Waffen SS. The UPA, however, also had a more complicated relationship with the Nazis and is a more politically sensitive subject today, as it was created by the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalist Bandera, OUNB, which is alive and well in Canada, unlike the Waffen SS veterans. The Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, founded in 1929, grew increasingly pro-Nazi during the 1930s. It split into two factions in 1940, with the more radical youthful wing, OUNB, led by Stepan Bandera. The OUNB hoped to make Bandera the fascist dictator of an independent, ethnically cleansed Ukraine allied to Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler had other plans, but the Banderites continued to collaborate with the Germans even after their leader wound up in a concentration camp. But in 1941, Shukevich was tapped as the de facto Ukrainian leader of a German military intelligence formation, the Nachtigall, or Nightingale Battalion, and the deputy commander of his successor, the Schutzmannschaft, or Auxiliary Police Battalion 201. In 1943, Shukevich became the UPA commander and the OUNB leader in Ukraine, positions he held until his death in 1950. Above all groups, all of the above groups murdered Jews. Shukevich's UPA massacred several thousand Jews and tens of thousands of Poles. Yes, they hate the Poles. This is who the statue in Edmonton is commemorating, but it gets worse. In 1972, construction began on the large Roman Shukevich Ukrainian Youth Unity Complex in Edmonton, including its bust of Shukevich at the entrance. According to historian Per Rudling, the Alberta government footed 10% of the approximate $750,000 in construction costs. In 2015, the federal government awarded a $279,000 grant to repair the aging OUNB-affiliated youth center. So for decades, Canada has underwritten the cultist worship of Ukrainian Nazi collaborator war criminals like Shukevich. Stranger and stranger, wouldn't you say? The Waffen SS cenotaph in Oakville, he concludes, is a relic of a mostly unknown chapter of Canadian history that needs further excavation. But so too do the Banderites, who are still active in Canada, propagandizing young people and exerting significant political influence, acting as the spokespeople of all Ukrainians. And again, I'm going to suggest that if Chrystia Freeland does succeed, Justin Trudeau as Liberal Party leader and Prime Minister, this could turn out very nasty for her. Oh, when it was definitively proven that her grandfather was a senior Nazi collaborator, so senior that when the Nazis were constantly retreating westward, they took him with them. And this fellow ended up as a U.S. military asset in a base in Bavaria at the end of World War II. This is a hilarious piece by Luka Ivan Jukic at Unheard. Ukraine unveils McKinsey program for nation builders. The $750 billion plan looks like an audit written for 19th century nationalists. McKinsey, of course they are involved. For example, one plan from the Youth and Sports Working Group sets out in 3 stages a path to solving the problem of insufficiently formed Ukrainian national and civic identity. Stage 1, to be completed this year, sees a unified narrative on the formation of Ukrainian identity being created. Stage 2, from January 2023 to December 2025, sees the level of Ukrainian identity in the country reaching 85%. And finally, Stage 3 envisions the field of national and patriotic education aligned with EU standards by 2032. The Culture and Information Working Group, for its part, proposed a far more comprehensive agenda. It calls for a sharp acceleration of the process of Ukrainian nation building that began in 2014, taking the Maidan Revolution of that year and the Russo-Ukrainian War as the new foundational myths of the modern Ukrainian nation state. Yes. The recovery plan calls for the dismantling of 99% of Soviet memorials targeted by decommunization laws by the end of the year. No denazification laws in Ukraine, though. No. Zelensky has publicly agreed that Stepan Bandera is one of the great heroes of Ukraine. Of course, Stepan Bandera was a genocidal maniac. Let's look at antiwar.com. Blinken won't meet with Lavrov at G20 summit. Putin says peace talks with Ukraine will be harder with time. In Kyiv, Senator Blumenthal hopes to see a hand-to-hand insurgency. Well, why don't you slap on a tin hat then, Senator Blumenthal? And I'm not going to say anything about the murder or assassination, if you will, of the former Prime Minister of Japan, because, as Anthony Burgess once said, I cannot formulate theories without data, and we know almost nothing about the reason for this assassination. Let's look at the Twitter feed of Pedro Gonzalez, which is always useful. And just scrolling down, Arta Moini tweeted, Ukraine marks our liberal ruling class's collective swan song for the post-1945 ideological world order. Just as Russia was co-opted by the Leninist ideology, so has America been reduced into a vessel for liberalism. And he expands on that in an essay for a Compact magazine, which I've already commended to you. Elbridge Colby tweets, for a long time, there's been a powerful strain of magical thinking about foreign and defense policy on the U.S. right. This got a new lease on life with the early stages of the Ukraine war. As reality is setting in there, we need to dispense with this and be super realistic. What do I mean? We will eliminate Russia as a rival power or transform it into a democracy by doubting Ukraine's prowess. We will democratize and stabilize the Middle East by overthrowing Saddam Hussein. We will make America invulnerable by missile defense. None of this is actually conservative. It's magical thinking to think we can solve or eliminate deep structural challenges just by will and the application of power. We need to root our foreign policy now in a sober assessment of the world and what Americans need to do in it. Such a lot of copium regarding the Ukraine, but of course, I suspect it's simply going to disappear from the news. Again, Zelensky. Oh, you remember when you were going crazy about that guy? You know, you just kept carrying on about him and his, that ferocious look on his face and his green T-shirts. You really seem to like the green T-shirts and the khaki pants. I don't recall anything about that. No, I'm sorry. I don't. I'm not sure if I've even heard of this Zelensky fellow. Frankly, it sounds made up. Today's obligatory Seinfeld reference. This is from Lauren Feiner at CNBC. Billionaire Elon Musk wants to end his $44 billion deal to buy Twitter, according to a letter sent by a lawyer on his behalf to the company's chief legal officer Friday. But Twitter's board chair Brett Taylor said the company is still committed to closing the deal at the agreed upon price and plans to pursue legal action to enforce the agreement. We are confident we will prevail in the Delaware Court of Chancery, Taylor wrote. Twitter shares were down about 6% after hours on Friday. In the letter disclosed in a SEC filing, Skadden Apps attorney Mike Ringler said that Twitter has not complied with its contractual obligations. Ringler claimed that Twitter did not provide Musk with relevant business information he requested, as Ringler said that the contract would require. Musk has previously said he wanted to assess Twitter's claims that about 5% of its monetizable daily active users are spam accounts. Twitter has failed or refused to provide this information, Ringler claimed. Sometimes Twitter has ignored Musk's requests, sometimes it has rejected them for reasons that appear to be unjustified, and sometimes it has claimed to comply while giving Musk incomplete or unusable information. Ringler also charged in the letter that Twitter breached the merger agreement because it allegedly contains materially inaccurate representations. This accusation is based on Musk's own preliminary review of spam accounts on Twitter's platform. Twitter has said it's not possible to calculate spam accounts from solely public information, and that a team of experts conducts a review to reach the 5% figure. Ringer alleged, while this analysis remains ongoing, all indications suggest that several of Twitter's public disclosures regarding its MDAUs are either false or materially misleading. While Musk is officially seeking to walk away from the deal, the saga is likely far from over. Under the terms of the agreement, Musk agreed to pay $1 billion if he backs out. But as Twitter's board chairs indicated that they would do, the company can seek to hold Musk to his original deal by suing him from walking away if they dispute that his reasoning should let him out of the contract. Twitter has reason to seek to hold Musk to his original terms. The stock has fallen considerably since the board announced that it had accepted his offer to buy the company at $54.20 a share. On the day of that announcement, the stock ended the trading day at $51.70. Twitter shares sat at $36.81 as of Friday's market close. Let's go back to the chat. Jay Boss says, why would Ukraine need denazification laws? Isn't that regime, no matter our criticism of, for the people of Ukraine, unlike communism, which is against the people of Ukraine? The government of the Ukraine is pretty much a phony country. Not quite as phony as Belgium, but pretty close. Ukraine is effectively a communist creation created by the Bolsheviks as part of Stalin's plan to placate ethnic minorities in the Soviet Union. And it is run by oligarchs for oligarchs. The present government derives from an illegal, murderous coup d'etat in 2014 executed by Victoria Nuland, star neocon of the U.S. State Department. The problem is that the president at the time had got a deal or a demand from the EU. And Putin came back with a deal which was much better in every respect and did not make the Ukraine a puppet of the European Union. So I believe it was Petro Poroshenko indicated that he was going to go with the Russian deal. And so the U.S. State Department said, no, you don't. We're going to impose a puppet regime there. We're going to slaughter people openly. And then we're going to start an endless artillery barrage of civilians in the Donbass because they don't want to be part of this illegal puppet state. Jay Boss says Ukraine is where the Western Scythians come from and where the Huns stopped and turned back. It is a famous historical war stage. Congrats to Elon on his newly reported twins. I believe he's at 10 children now, says Agurian. A new name. Hello. Strategically adaptive memeplex is almost as phony as Belgium. Now, them are fighting words. LOL. I could throw Romania into the mix, you know. I could throw Romania in there. Frothing Fanboy says Ukraine existed briefly as a country starting in 1920. The various tribes bordering Russia felt they had enough in common to want to be their own legal entity. Well, of course, Ukraine, under the communists, had its own seat at the United Nations. So did Belarus, or whatever they were calling it at that time. Uh, Jim Bowden says, "Come on, KMG, mate. Please stop swallowing hook, line, and sinker the historical narrative of the small hats." Small hats? Hmm? Hmm? I know that these people like Bandera and Chukovich, who are adored by the Ukrainians, had a genocidal hatred of the Poles, and they killed around 100,000 of them. It wasn't just the Russians and the Jews they hated; they hated the Poles, and they killed every single one they could get their hands on. Looking at the Polish government's reaction to recent events, one has to wonder whether they have lost their minds. Because, well, to give one example, the ruler of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, has made it clear that he wants Poland and Hungary to be expelled from the EU because they're not sufficiently pro-alphabet people. Oscar Toe says, "Free the bodega man." Okay, what else do we have here? Hello to Seven Costanza. Oh, yes, the 60-year-old bodega owner who defended himself and now has been charged with murder. Well, it's people shouldn't defend themselves. It's bad for them. Illegal to defend themselves. Conditions in the United States are nowhere near as bad as in Britain, where I'm not making this up. If you leave your house with as much as a hat pin in order to defend yourself from robbers, rapists, whatever, you are guilty of a crime. And Ukrainian flag flies over Snake Island again, says Halper. Oh, second time is the charm, is it? Dr. Dead Name marvels, rubber boats. All I see about the Ukraine thing in the news anymore is that the Ukrainians picked off another Russian top general, says Oscar Toe. I hope Trudeau remains PM until he is Ceausescu'd along with the Freeland woman, says Anne Run. But not the soy Canadians will ever do that, even in Minecraft. Polygon says it's basically illegal to be conservative / right wing in Canada. Slight hyperbole, but not much. Not much. Citizen X was an HBO movie too. They put together some good ones in the 90s, Oscar Toe. Was that about, no, did they make another movie called Citizen Cone about Roy Cohn? Thank you for your kind words, Polygon. I don't think that Anthony Hopkins is a terrible actor. I think he's done lots of good work. The Bounty is one of my favorites, but he does have a tendency to overact. On Golden Pond, yikes. Ugh. Oscar Bate. Have you seen Mark Rydell before? He was great as an observant Jewish gangster in The Long Goodbye, says Halper. Isn't he better known as a director? I think he is. Okay. Let's move on. And now we are going to talk about, oh yes, the continuing insanity in the United States military. This is from Christina Wong at Breitbart. An Army training slide obtained by Breitbart News instructs soldiers to shower with transgender members of the opposite sex, even if they have not undergone a surgical transition. The training slide offers a vignette instructing soldiers on what to do if they encounter a female soldier who identifies as male, according to the Department of Defense's personnel tracking system, known as Defense Enrollment Eligibility Reporting System, or DEERS, but has not surgically transitioned and still has female genitalia. The slide titled Soldier Unit Training Barracks Bathrooms and Showers reads, following his transition from female to male, which did not include sex reassignment surgery and gender marker change in DEERS, a transgender soldier begins using male barracks, bathroom, and shower facilities because he did not undergo a surgical change. The soldier still has a female genitalia. Soldiers must accept living and working conditions that are often austere, primitive, and characterized by little or no privacy. Understand anyone may encounter individuals in barracks, bathrooms, and shower facilities with physical characteristics of the opposite sex, despite having the same gender market in Deers. The training slides warn soldiers that violations of equal opportunity policies may result in disciplinary actions under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and that EO policies apply to working, living, and recreational environment on and off post during duty and non-duty hours. Uh, uh, yeah. So it appears that the United States military is heading down Canada's road. And Canada's military, what purpose does it serve? To defend Canada? As I joked some years ago, I think 200 men with 22s could take Ottawa. And I was barely exaggerating. The Canadian Army, what is its purpose? To produce sexual harassment and PTSD claims. As far as I can tell, it has no other purpose. And we don't have any weapons anymore because we've sent them all to the Ukraine. And in more Joe Biden news, did you see the bit where he read off the teleprompter, repeat the line? Did you see that bit? What was that fellow in that movie about the news business, about Anchorman, Ron somebody or other, who would just read what was ever on the teleprompter? This is from Foreign Desk News by Lisa Daftari. Under a new Biden administration policy, illegal aliens who are deported from the United States are no longer forced to wait outside the country for up to 10 years before applying for legal status. The law was meant to deter people from trying to live in the country illegally. Previously, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services would have denied any application for legal status under the so-called 3-year tenure rule. That meant that anyone without legal status for at least 6 months but less than a year had to depart and wait 3 years before applying to come back legally. Anyone in the country illegally for more than a year had to wait 10 years. Emilio Gonzalez, who headed the USCIS during the George W. Bush administration, said the new Biden protocol is like the Clinton administration policy, don't ask, don't tell. We won't ask you where you've been during your inadmissible period, and you don't tell us. It's sheer craziness. Well, the Biden administration is simply importing ringers from other countries so the Democrats can continue to win elections. And there was a recent case in the state of New York where, shock horror, a large number, was it 800,000 or something like that? Illegal immigrants were told that they could not vote. Oh my. I mean, I suppose if they keep doing it, keep trying, they will find some judge who says, yes, we found in the Constitution here that it's illegal to stop illegals from voting. And by the way, don't call them illegals. They're undocumented migrants. Number 2 on my list, never forget. This is from Alex Berenson. I know what you did last summer and fall. You tried to take away my rights and segregate me, and no, you don't get to pretend you didn't. We've all blocked the malign forces that started to swirl around this time last year, haven't we? The jabbed and the purebloods too. We've all just decided to pretend it never happened. Let me remind you, because it's important that we never forget. A since deleted tweet from Matthew Iglesias, founder of Vox, Bloomberg columnist, firm believer in the current thing. No penalty. Absent politics, my policy would be you either get jabbed voluntarily within the next X weeks and get $50, or else you get jabbed later while someone holds you down and you get $0. Berenson continues, July 2021 offered the first proof that the mRNA COVID vaccines were failing far more quickly than the public health authorities had expected. Israel, the first country to mass vaccinate, went from 10 COVID infections a day in early June to over 2,000 by late July. Deaths followed. This failure came at a bad time for the Biden administration and public health bureaucrats. They'd counted on the vaccines to show us yet again that they were our betters, that they could end COVID and lead us all into a glorious sickness and carbon free future. Aside from the private jet snatch, all animals are equal. At the time, I imagined the fact that the mRNA shots were failing so fast would lead the White House and public health authorities to reconsider their plans to press them on the world and maybe start to investigate what was going on with this rushed and barely tested biotechnology. Silly me. Instead, the vaccinators went the other way. They doubled down, pressing a two-pronged strategy. Prong one was medical boosters. The push for a third shot ran contrary to the most basic principle of medicine: first, do no harm. The vaccines had been tested on a two-dose regimen, and trials of a third dose were in their infancy. Everyone knew boosters would briefly raise anti-spike protein level antibody levels, but we had every reason to expect that those antibodies would quickly wane within months, meaning still another jab would soon be required, as has happened. Nor did we know what the side effects of more shots might be, and we still don't, not really. Further, despite what the vaccinators have insisted ad infinitum since last summer, it is unclear that the mRNA shots prevent severe disease and death once their ability to stop infections wanes. They certainly do not prevent it completely. Vaccinated people account for nearly all COVID deaths in countries like Australia and Britain. So the press for a third shot was at best a delaying action. Nonetheless, it was born of decent motives, the desire to do something to reverse the failure of the vaccines. Berenson continues, the same cannot be said of prong two, which was not medical but political and cultural. Governments and media outlets dropped their efforts to persuade unvaccinated people to take the shots voluntarily. Instead, they began a coordinated worldwide effort to demonize the unvaccinated and press or flat out force them to take the shots. Public health authorities, reporters, and politicians worked together on these efforts, which took many forms. Mandates requiring COVID vaccination for employment, even for people who work from home. Travel restrictions or bans, including border restrictions and the use of local public transportation. Bans on shopping, going to restaurants, on bars, watching live sporting events or movies or other recreations. Requiring vaccination as a condition of college attendance, again, even for students who are only online. Forcing unvaccinated people to pay more for their health insurance. Health ethicists even seriously debated whether people who had chosen not to be vaccinated should be denied routine medical treatment or even sent to the back of the line for emergency treatment. And here's a commentary from Medscape by Arthur Kaplan, PhD. I've known of this Arthur Kaplan fellow. He's one of the leading bioethicists. And whenever I hear the word bioethicist, I know that whatever this person has to say is going to be flat out evil. Kaplan's piece, October 13, 2021, titled, "It's Okay for Docs to Refuse to Treat Unvaccinated Patients." Berenson continues, I believe those were the major lines of discrimination. If I've forgotten any, please let me know. The hatred, no other word will do, really, that underlay this effort cannot be ignored, nor can its importance. Last year's efforts at vaccine coercion were the most serious effort to discriminate legally in the United States since the end of legal racial segregation in the South, and it marked a stunning reversal of 2 generations of efforts to expand civil rights in the United States and Europe. Alongside the legal strictures came pronounced cultural and media efforts to frighten and demonize unvaccinated people. On September 16th, Frank Bruni, a longtime writer for The Times, praised a pizzeria near his house that had barred the unvaccinated. Quote, what if the willfully, proudly, stubbornly unvaccinated were ever more frustrated as they sought their pleasures and ever more inconvenienced as they ran their errands? Would that wear down the resistance of at least a few of them? Isn't it worth trying? 2 months later, Charles Blow, another Times columnist, went further. I'm furious at the vaccinated. That was from December the 8th, 2021. I wonder how strong the correlation is between homosexuality and Corona Doom panic, and Corona Doom coercion. Berenson comments, remember how it felt to have to decide between quitting your job and taking a vaccine that you didn't want? Or to wonder if you would ever go to another country again or get on a plane at all if you were in Canada? or choose between letting your son go to college and take a vaccine that was not merely unnecessary for him, but potentially dangerous, or have your voice taken from you as the world's largest outlet for journalism suspended your access to it? As a reader wrote me a couple of days ago, things were very scary in July, August 2021. I thought I was going to lose my job and other rights because the pressure to get vaccinated was so intense. And this is nothing of the even more personal consequences, the friendships lost and the family relationships destroyed. Those fights were rarely started by those of us who had not been vaccinated. We merely wanted to live our lives. It was the jabbed who insisted on vilifying us and who could blame them when everyone from Joe Biden on down was doing the same. The pressure peaked last fall as the work vaccine mandate deadlines neared and the holidays and another winter of COVID approached. We will never know how many adults felt compelled to take these mRNA jabs against their strong wishes, even though the number is surely in the millions, perhaps the tens of millions. We will never know how many more people who were jabbed willingly regret doing so, now that the failure of the vaccines is so obvious, not even the most ideologically blinkered media outlets can ignore them. What we do know is that the mandates have failed as badly as the vaccines themselves, aside, unfortunately, from the military, the only place where the fools in the White House who have committed themselves to this course last year retain complete control. I understand the impetus to forget what happened, forget those ugly seasons. The vaccine fanatics want to whitewash what they did, and many who resisted would now simply rather move on. Berenson concludes, but we can't. The stakes are too high because there will be another virus, and we must remember the mistakes we made, the most profound ethical and medical failures of our policies, so we never repeat them. And I'm sure, in the years to come, a great many of these people are going to again deny that they engaged in any, shall we say, near genocidal language. But people will remember James McDaniel on Twitter, self-described as observer of the world and pro photographer, former Microsoft video game producer, and gadget guru on FM radio. You thought the treatment of folks going barefaced in 2020 was intense. Wait until you see how unvaccinated people still wearing a mask in good faith and according to CDC guidelines were ostracized as dangerous pariahs in 2021. Let's name the criminals. From the post-millennial, unvaccinated students numbered with a Sharpie marker at a New Hampshire prom. And here is a tweet by the Alice Smith. The Delta variant, which is a monstrous shark about to tear apart a duck, which says unvaxxed. Jason Rants on KTTH radio. They're not hiding it. Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo say unvaccinated shouldn't even be allowed to buy groceries. These people are ghouls, and it's particularly disturbing since Cuomo violated mandates and his brother's policies killed people. Yes, thousands and thousands of people. Someone called Uncle Turmoil tweeted, at this point, anyone refusing the vaccine is a terrorist. They are killing people. An article from The Atlantic. Unvaccinated people need to bear the burden. And who is responsible? This is from someone called Juliet Kayam. It's a name that she continued, beyond limiting the coronavirus's flow from hotspots to the rest of the country, allowing only vaccinated people on domestic flights will change minds, too. Twitter deleted, but still. This is from Lars McMurtry. The CDC should roll out a new program, get the shot or get shot. The unvaccinated need to be rounded up and lined up in front of open trenches. Their choice is simple. America has had enough of their virus. We need to get back to normal life with or without them. And this is from the real Steve Cox. Whenever anyone says we all die from something or a variation thereof to justify not taking precautions to help protect others in this pandemic, we should be allowed to shoot them. Why are you crying? We all die from something. For you, it's that bullet in the gut. Who is this real Steve Cox? Is he a talk radio host? Let me check here. Former independent candidate for Congress, 39th district. Okay. That's quite a rallying cry, wouldn't you say? He was responding to Matt Walsh, who said COVID is here to stay. You're going to get it. It almost certainly won't kill you, but it could. You'll probably get cancer eventually, too, unless you die first. Lots of scary things out there. Death is certain and suffering is unavoidable. Yes. And here's a cartoon from some American newspaper. The vaccinated, educated, inoculated, liberated, insulated. And there's a woman there wearing a mask. And the Novax, contaminated, decimated, wound up most likely to end up refrigerated. And it's some ugly redneck, and there's like stink bubbles coming off him. Fed Up MN said, I want a federal law stating if you get sick and are unvaccinated, you are not allowed in a hospital. You're not allowed to take beds from responsible Americans. J. Douglas Little, my position is that we must make the lives of the unvaccinated a total misery and just keep escalating the exclusions until we crush the resistance and break their spirit in order to force compliance, and so they learn not to resist government mandates. George Takei, who is another male homosexual, are you sensing a trend here? Tweeted on 8/13/21, the willfully unvaccinated who wind up in hospitals from COVID should not receive priority medical care over other very sick or injured people who are as much in need of urgent care. North Texas Hospital will soon use vaccination status to decide if you're worth an ICU bed. David Reboy reported this August 19th, 2021. From mynorthwest.com, middle school teacher says we're lucky if unvaccinated die. From the Post Millennial, Washington Public School forces student athletes to wear ankle tracking monitors. Arnie Duncan, wasn't he some top education official for the Obama administration? Tweeted again in August 2021, have you noticed how strikingly similar both the mindsets and actions are between the suicide bombers at Kabul's airport and the anti-mask and anti-vax people here? They both blow themselves up, inflict harm on those around them, and are convinced they are fighting for freedom. Noam Chomsky says the right response to the unvaccinated is to insist that they be isolated from society. Jimmy Kimmel says unvaccinated people shouldn't get ICU beds. Greg Gutfeld said the great unifier is saying that all those who are vaxxed are mad at those who aren't. So this is not true. Basically, he said the unvaxxed are the new terrorists. He showed more anger toward that 80 million than the orderly and kind Taliban. Leanna Wen, MD, who is frequently on CNN as a medical expert, said President Biden's strategy for fighting COVID-19 does not go far enough to compel vaccinations. The time for cajoling is over. Biden should use his full authority to make it difficult for Americans to remain unvaccinated. From Don Lemon again, who is another homosexual. Like Trump voters, we should call unvaxxed Americans stupid and start shaming them, or leave them behind because they're keeping the majority of Americans behind. And James McDaniel points to eliminationist rhetoric. That's exactly what it is. And this is from our own Toronto Star. If an unvaccinated person catches it from someone who is vaccinated, boo-hoo, too bad. I have no empathy left for the willfully unvaccinated. Let them die. I honestly don't care if they die from COVID, not even a little bit. Unvaccinated patients do not deserve ICU beds. At this point, who cares? Stick the unvaccinated in a tent outside and tend to them when the staff has time. This is on the front page, taking up everything above the fold, 3 columns out of 4, and even below the fold. The Toronto Star decided, yes, to use eliminationist language. I suppose they are looking pretty stupid now. But these are the type of people who never admit their mistakes. Never. And since we don't punish people for crimes anymore, criminally or civilly, then I guess they can keep on going. This is from Jack Bingham at LifeSite News. Ontario Premier Doug Ford quickly exited a press conference after a reporter asked if he was aware his chief medical officer of health has a conflict of interest with vaccine giant Pfizer. Mr. Ford, do you know that Kieran Moore has financial ties with Pfizer and he sits on one of their advisory boards? Rebel News reporter Tamara Ugolini asked Ford in a video posted last week. Sorry, we're going, thanks, a female staff member for Ford replied. Mr. Ford, were you aware of that when you appointed Kieran Moore? The reporter asked again while Ford and his staff members walked away. And the reporter pressed and Ford continued to ignore. We all love Pfizer, right? Because Pfizer equals science. More on that shortly. Yes, Pfizer tweeted yesterday a picture of a cat wearing sunglasses. And it says, if you don't believe in science, I don't even see you. And above, it says, the future looks brighter with science. I responded, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla is not a physician. He is a veterinarian. I'm told that vets are typically depressed because they are paid to kill so many pets. Bourla, however, does not repine. And let's go to Jim Kunstler's column for today, which is called Ignition, Lift Off. It looks like someone has called room service in a certain Swiss fortress of solitude and ordered der Schwabenklaus's ass to be handed to him on a platter with a side of sauerkraut. The assisted suicide of Western Civ Eurodivision has been interrupted by peasant uprisings, first in the Netherlands, now spreading to Germany, Italy, and Poland. The farmers are on the march. They are coming for you, Klaus, and your World Economic Forum's legion of implanted government goblins. The governments of virtually all the nations of Western Civ have become enemies of their people. It's been obvious in the USA for quite some time, but our preposterous attempt to turn Ukraine into a forward NATO missile base next door to Russia finally revealed the villainous rot in Euroland too. Cut yourselves off, Germany, from Russian oil and natural gas? Whose bright idea was that? Hint, Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Who else? He supposedly runs that joint, doesn't he? Plan B, you Deutsches Volk now realize, is to burn your furniture to stay warm at Christmas. America's gambit to goad Russia into a Ukrainian quagmire turned into such a mighty fail that the U.S. news media doesn't even report on the doings there anymore. Which are, the Russians sent in their junior varsity and systematically wiped the floor with Ukraine's 250,000-man NATO-trained army of neo-Nazis. This is not an empty pejorative, by the way. They really are explicitly true believers in old Adolf's mid-20th century program of exterminating the Rus people next door. Putin wasn't kidding around when he highlighted that feature of his operation. So now the heart of Euroland looks forward to a new era without energy and without modern industry, meaning what? Well, without modern life, maybe without life, period. Der Schwabenklaus outlined that pretty clearly too, with the by now shop-worn slogan that you will own nothing and you will be happy. It was such an absurd maxim that many who pretend to think took it as sort of a joke. And let's face it, Klaus really does appear to be a comic figure. The weirdo tunic he sometimes wears, the Hollywood B-movie accent, but not so many are laughing now as the lights go out from Galway Bay to the Gulf of Riga. If not the sinister Schwabenklaus, then, who or what entity is behind this world-ending mischief remains a matter of baffling consternation. Quite a few people, otherwise not insane, say we're enthralled to some hovering alien presence, not of this earth, somehow directing our own destruction. Personally, I find that a bit silly. The most persuasive real-world clues point to China's Communist Party. Where did the Wuhan flu emanate from? Trick question. At whose 2019 Wuhan World Military Games did the first outbreak occur? Ditto. Whose policy model was adopted in the US and Euroland for dealing with that punk-ass virus with lockdowns? And which current president of the USA has been on the payroll of the CCP for nearly a decade via shady business deals grifted up by a son? Hmm. The later saga of our Hunter Biden is so well publicized in its grotesque details, smoking crack and cavorting with Russian whores on camera, that it seems just like another Netflix series. But guess what? It's really real. And so are all the deal memoranda and emails on Hunter's laptop, which has been in the passive possession of the FBI for 3 years. And you mean to tell me that no one has done anything about it? How is director Chris Wray still walking around a free man? Meanwhile, the very people who helped engineer the Wuhan SARS C19 virus and the mRNA vaccines, now proving, well, I can't repeat that, are still in the employ of our government. Anthony Fauci and former NIH Director Francis Collins, currently Joe Biden's chief science advisor in the White House at 300 plus K a year. The effrontery. Notice, too, that having winkled the Pentagon into vaccinating all our troops, including our military women with penises and men with vaginas, we now have an army program to drop dead on any battlefield they find themselves at without an enemy firing a shot. How do we even propose to defend North America if, say, China took a notion to seize our land by main force? These quandaries and conundrums form a toxic cloud of cognitive dissonance blanketing America like a cosmic miasma of wickedness. We've got to turn the tables on these ghouls running things. Kunstler continues, this week a serious rebellion has sparked off in Europe. The Dutch government moved to seize the land belonging to about a third of its farmers, supposedly to cut nitrogen oxide emissions so as to satisfy WEF-inspired EU 2030 climate goals. There is more horseshit in the government's policy pretext than there is on the farms of Holland, so the farmers have formed a tractor army of rebellion, blocked highways and border crossings, and mixed it up physically with the police. As I said at the beginning, the revolt against official climate change psychosis is spreading quickly to other European countries. Perhaps the non-elites of Europe have realized that they were played for chumps. They were. They went along with the vaccine mandates, only to learn now that their countrymen are dropping dead at suspiciously alarming rates. And maybe it has something to do with those shots they lined up for so obediently. And they can see the vast loss of jobs and income ahead as their industries have to shut down for lack of fuel. And they can see how their governments seek to starve them and force them to freeze to death a few months from now. So it's game on, and governments are about to fall across Europe, and God knows what kind of strife will erupt out of that. Bojo is gone in the UK. Holland's PM Mark Rutte may be next, Olaf Scholz after him, and Mario Draghi in Italy. Look out below. Kunstler concludes, as of this writing Friday morning, we have no idea what the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe might signify, except perhaps the ominous beginning of a global trend. And, here's some. The MSN is catching up with what people like Berenson and Eugippius and, well, me have been saying for quite some time. This is from NBC News. COVID booster shots appear to be less than 20% effective against infection with the Omicron variant of the virus just a few months after the booster is given, a new study found this week. This is also from NBC, from Jennifer Millman. All 5 boroughs of New York City are back in the CDC's high-risk category for COVID community spread as of the agency's Friday update, a reflection of the increasingly infectious national climate as the worst version of Omicron yet holds its dominance. One gets the impression that the people of New York, they really they missed the masks, they missed the distancing, they missed the isolation. They loved staying at home, ordering DoorDash or whatever, and then, prepaying, and then tiptoeing to the door and opening it after the delivery driver had gone away, and then poking head out, careful not to breathe any of that air in the hallway, quickly snatching it up, slamming the door, locking it. Survived that. Some good news on this front. This is from Hope King at Axios. Despite what many people thought at the onset of the pandemic, the ancient greeting of handshakes was always going to come back, and it has. Business travel has rebounded, so have in-person conferences and corporate retreats have become more popular amid the rise of virtual teams. At no point during meetings or events that I've attended in LA, Austin, DC, or Cannes, France, over the past 2 months, did I hesitate to reach out and shake hands, nor did I sense hesitation from anyone else. More than just the return of a familiar custom, you get a sense for the person controlling that hand, and that is why handshakes matter. The big picture, the pandemic hasn't technically ended, but people are clearly eager to get back to normal routines. The bottom line, we can't replicate what we learned from human touch. People, yeah, they'll want to get back to normal times, except for the, 20, 30% who have been broken permanently by Corona Doom. And that's the only appropriate word I can find to describe them: broken. Eugipius writes, ha 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 ha. Why? Despite not only following but embodying the science, global vaccinator-in-chief Anthony Fauci caught corona while attending a school reunion on June the 11th. While most Omicron infections resolve within a week, the quadruple vaccinated NIAID director and blight upon human civilization suffered Paxlovid rebound 10 days ago and is now approaching a month of infection. Yesterday, he ended his radio silence to give some press interviews. Quote, I believe I'm about close to, if not at 100% the way I was before infection. So I'm really fortunate that I've done very well. And I keep telling people when they ask me that, is that why I was vaccinated and doubly boosted? And I believe that if I did not have that degree of background protection, I would have had a much more serious course. My course was relatively light, minor symptoms, and right now I'm completely without symptoms, and I feel very good, very energetic. Oh, it's a minor illness that incapacitated you for 4 weeks. Eugipius concludes non-zero chance he rebounds again. And let's take a look at another disease. This is from Benjamin Ryan at NBC News. Lesions, headaches, debilitating pain. Gay men with monkeypox share their stories. Men who have sex with men comprise the vast majority of monkeypox cases in this unprecedented outbreak. 18 of them talked to NBC News about their experiences. This is shaping up to be AIDS 2. So they interviewed these homosexual men, and guess what? It turns out all of these homosexual men like to have sex with strangers several times a week. Who could have guessed? Jeff, who's in his mid-30s and is a university administrator in a mid-Atlantic state, spent a couple of weeks traveling through Europe through early June. He made stops in London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Berlin, having sex with multiple partners along the way, he said, including in a bathhouse and a sex club in the German capital. There's hundreds of men in this club, Jeff said, recalling considerable skin-to-skin contact between patrons. Obviously, no one's coming down to wipe down the sling. Anne Remoyne, an epidemiologist at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health and a leading monkeypox expert. Ooh, we're going to get a lot of monkeypox experts. Said in reference to the sharing of sex slings, given the risk of transmission by fomites, contaminated objects, it is theoretically possible for monkeypox to be transmitted in this manner. Peter, 28, said he went to a sex party in a house on Fire Island, a gay beach enclave, about 2 hours from New York City on June 14th. And then, out of the approximately 15 attendees, he and at least 6 other men now have monkeypox. Peter said gay men should be vigilant, looking for signs of monkeypox on their bodies and those of their sex partners. How about stop having sex many times a week with strangers? That would be too much to ask male homosexuals. It would be homophobic to suggest that. And in a related story, shocking news from the Washington Post, Jessica Contreras. He was one of the nation's most revered gay cops. His arrest changed everything. Did you know that there were revered gay cops and that there was a list of most revered gay cops? His name is Brett Parsons, and he was arrested in Florida for having sex with a minor, a 16-year-old boy who was chosen because of his youth on a gay app called Growler. The 16-year-old's profile listed his age as 18. It described him as 5'7" and 140 pounds. From a list of words to describe himself, one he chose was boy. The term is sometimes used by adults in the gay community who identify or present as youthful, or for men in the gay community who want to have sex with boys. And you know what the saddest thing about this story? Is that it tends to reinforce certain stereotypes about homosexual men. Of course, they don't seem to be considering there's a reason why stereotypes exist. A sad story at the pit.substack.com. A quarter of the girls in my daughter's class identify as transgender, 7 out of 28. When I said that on Twitter recently, I was roundly attacked for being a TERF who makes up ridiculous stories to harm trans people. Well, I may be a TERF, but I did not make this up. A quarter of the girls in my kids' class identify as boys. One of them has had 4 names this year, all from anime series. I keep seeing people say, both on the health site Twitter and in the popular media, that the trans population is a tiny minority, less than 0.1% of the population. If that is true, what is going on at my child's school? What has made the number of trans-identified girls in 1 year group grow from a constant 0 pre-pandemic to 25% now? Here's my theory, and I know this will be a familiar story for many parents. The first issue is what the school is teaching children. My daughter's trans identity started when the school taught a module on identity, during which they told a group of 11-year-olds that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, it means you are transgender. My daughter had just had her first period 2 months prior to this class. Of course, she was feeling uncomfortable in her body. She went home, looked up transgender on TikTok, and that was it. She is now trans. The second issue is a related one, and that is to do with the school's non-stop celebration of alphabet people identities. I used to be proud that my children attended a progressive school that is anti-racist, inclusive, and believes in social justice. We chose the school for these qualities. But in the last 2 to 3 years, this has meant a relentless stream of identity flags and rainbows. Transgender heroes like Jazz Jennings are working into any part of the curriculum that they even vaguely fit. This is a school for kids aged 9 to 13. I'm no prude, but I don't think a constant parade of sexual politics is appropriate for such young children. The third issue is with how the school is approaching the children's so-called coming out. Their official policy seems to be just go through with whatever the kids say without informing the parents. If a child says they have a new name and pronouns, the school just rolls with it, and they create the scenario where an already distressed child ends up cycling through 4 names in 6 months. The public school system, the greatest threat to our survival? Discuss. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The United Nations was forced to delete a weird, supposedly satirical article which celebrates the benefits of world hunger after an online backlash. Originally published in 2008, the article titled "The Benefits of World Hunger" was recently reposted to UN's Chronicle magazine. We sometimes talk about hunger in the world as if it were a scourge that all of us want to see abolished, wrote the author, Professor George Kent of the University of Hawaii. Kent added that hunger was actually a great positive value to many people. Indeed, it is fundamental to the working of the world's economy. Hungry people are the most productive people, especially when there is a need for manual labor. Yes, satirical. Very, very satirical. Watson writes, the piece was deleted from the UN website after attracting negative attention from alternative media outlets. As we document in the video below, technocratic globalist green agenda policies are threatening to cause world hunger. Farmers in the Netherlands, which is one of the largest exporters of meat in the world, have been told they'll have to comply with draconian nitrogen emissions cuts. This will force many of them to shut down their farms for good, risking the food security of hundreds of millions of people at a time when food inflation and a cost of living crisis is already in full swing. Was that Yuval Noah Harari, the big brain from Israel, saying that the vast majority of humanity is made up of useless eaters? Well, I suppose, if the food supply is strangled, we can get rid of so many of those useless eaters. Well, sparing people like Big Brain, Harari. If you want to find the UN article, it's been archived at archive.ph, and just search Chronicle Benefits World Hunger, and you should find it. And oh, yes, in Germany, a left wing minister at Thuringia wants to confiscate guns owned by members of the Alliance for Germany. There's a piece at Steve Saylor's site called Barely Half of Murders Are Now Being Solved. And a few years ago on my old podcast with Kevin Steele, I reviewed Jill Levy's outstanding book called Ghetto Side. If you want to understand what life is like in the inner city, this book is invaluable. The inner cities, or ghettos as we used to call them, are hellscapes. And we don't see much reporting about them because everyone has just thrown up their eyes. It's too horrifying to contemplate. Steve Saylor writes, I doubt if American police forces in 1965 were staffed by Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, Columbo, and Nancy Drew. But the graph above is probably fairly accurate for the last few decades, with the rise of crack gangs in the second half of the 1980s, building an infrastructure for witness intimidation. And the sharp decline in 2020 seems characteristic of that lowly year. In 28, the so-called clearance rate for murders was in 65, about 85%, and it is down to less than 50% in 2020. Let's see, the last 7 months of 2020 were June through December. Did something happen in late May 2020 that made the police less effective? A commenter who's good at arithmetic might wish to estimate what the real black share of murder offenders is if blacks make up 56.5% of known murder offenders in 2020 in cleared cases. Jill Levy reported that about a dozen murder witnesses per year in early 2000 were intent murdered in South Central Los Angeles. Snitches get stitches. Yes, indeed. But there was another catchphrase from her book, which is everybody know. Someone gets whacked in the inner city, almost immediately everyone knows who did it, but no one says anything to the police because snitches get stitches, with the result, the horrifying result, that in places like the inner city of Los Angeles, everybody knows someone who's a murderer. Pretty much everybody does. A lot of murders of whites in LA are domestics, which are pretty easy to solve. The man of the house did it. Also, Los Angeles is so expensive that it doesn't have many traditional white American lowlifes left anymore, except it has a lot of white homeless. Los Angeles has exported to many states many of its white people who might, say, kill somebody in a bar fight with a beer mug to the head. On the other hand, other states have exported a lot of their meth addict white homeless to California, swings and roundabouts. In the post-crack era, clearance rates tend to improve for 2020 for everybody. Murder mystery solving technology is always getting better, except among blacks who continue to get it worse. African Americans have a cultural problem that is conducive to murder, and it hasn't been getting better. But of course, to say that African Americans have a murder culture problem is a hateful racist stereotype, because it's true. Again, ABA, always be avoiding. If Black people in the United States do not believe that murder is such a serious crime, one that is so damaging to community that it must be reported, then they have decided to opt out of civilization. And let's end with some happy news. Aren't you ready for some happy news? This is from Malcolm Kunier. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, who is half African and half Swedish. He lives in Sweden. Say goodbye to your email job. Speaking of the death of the American dream these days takes one squarely into cliche territory. The various social and economic crises of the United States are so well documented, so obviously non-transitory, that it's hard to imagine that there are all that many real dreamers left. More fundamentally, the country is probably too fractured to be able to sustain one dream, that everyone recognizes and pays cultural tribute to. Rather, it seems to me that the United States has gone the way of pretty much every Western country. Indeed, Americans led the developed world into this place, where dreaming about a better sort of future is a matter of entrepreneurship of the self, as much for social democrats as for neoliberals and neoconservatives. When the former leader of Sweden's Social Democratic Party, Mona Sahlin, claimed that it doesn't matter where you were born, only where you are moving to, she was riffing on this mode of dreaming, a vision of the startup nation, where venture capitalists and digital nomads are assigned mystical, almost spiritual power, and the goal of every person is to uproot his ties to old soil and fully assimilate into the cyber millennium. From Sweden to Germany to France, the citizen is evaluated according to his ability to conform to the Silicon Valley model of the future, a dreamscape populated by app designers visiting trendy coffee shops and artisanal hot dog vendors in urban centers while spending their days revolutionizing the Internet of Things. But it seems that even that dream is now about to die. Layoffs in the tech industry have recently exploded. Even Meta's Mark Zuckerberg is warning of job losses. Meta's so called metaverse, the bete noir of some on the right, is losing almost $1 billion a month, while being widely panned by gamers and content creators on YouTube. Far from being a harbinger of a dystopian total recall style future, where physical space is replaced by virtual reality under totalizing control by the world's progressive elites, the metaverse is now looking like a perfectly ordinary .com dud. Even Silicon Valley nightmares, it seems, are slowly coming to an end, unceremoniously drowned in the cool water of a general economic crisis. If the 1970s ended up destroying one aspect of an older American dream, the idea that one could, through honesty and hard work, make a comfortable and decent life for oneself on one's salary without necessarily having to go to college or work in the financial sector scamming fellow Americans, then the early 2020s looks likely to see the destruction of the tech vision that increasingly came to replace it. This new dream promised far less justice and a far starker division between winners and losers, but it was still a vision in which if you hustled, moved to the right city, and befriended the right people, you too could work an email job in tech, enjoying a smorgasbord of perks and subsidies along the way. I remember an ex-girlfriend waxing poetic about the new fruits of this late 2010s economy, DoorDash, Uber, all the rest of it, available on demand through various new apps for people with the fortune and good sense to live in the hip inner cities of the West rather than the rural hinterlands. And Malcolm Cuyuni continues, but this entire world had long been backstopped by completely unsustainable subsidies from venture capital firms and by extension through the federal money printer. The crisis of the 70s would come to devastate Main Street, but the people who benefited from this, those who would come to replace the likes of a stodgy Archie Bunker as the model American, now find themselves the proverbial deer in the headlights of another massive economic contraction and restructuring. In the Trump years, we debated the anger of globalization's losers and whether the winners bore any responsibility for that anger. But in the Biden years, we will increasingly have to debate the rage that is sure to brew among the erstwhile winners themselves as the app economies and tech boom are crushed. Where will that anger end up leading? In the end, America might quite soon find itself in a situation where no broad socioeconomic group feels any loyalty or has any stake in the political system. Instead, anger at having their lives upended and their standards of living destroyed will be the order of the day from Boise to Bushwick. General Mark Milley infamously tested before a congressional hearing that he wanted to understand so-called white rage. But who right now is prepared for progressive, multiracial, demisexual rage as the core social groups driving progressivism in America are hit the hardest by layoffs and the end of Silicon Valley subsidies? That rage is coming, and it may have no brakes. Yes, well, this is what Peter Turchin calls the overproduction of elites. And the overproduction of elites frequently leads to revolution because the people who've been bred to be winners, to tell everyone what to do when they find out that that future is no longer possible, they have very often in the past adopted, shall we say, extreme political views. I mean, more extreme, say, than listening to watching Tucker Carlson videos, which is all it takes apparently to be considered an extreme right winger in Canada. Again, this is from the excellent compactmag.com, and it's a free article from Malcolm K. Uni. So finally, I'm going to check to see whether life in Canada has returned to normal somewhat. No, Interact is not up yet. And let's check Rogers. And are they up yet? Come on, come on. No. And their latest tweet was 3 hours ago. They're working real hard. They've deployed every technical resource and partner to solve the problem. They're making progress, they said 5 hours ago, but not enough progress, apparently. Let's take a final look at the chat. Yo Mama says, remember when everybody laughed at W's gaffes? I do. And I thought he conducted himself in a deplorable way. But going up behind Angela Merkel and goosing her or whatever it was he did, or talking about KIAs in Iraq with a big smile on his face. Chokin666 says that's what the goon squads are for. Look at Belgium. Millions of people marched after the Dutroux scandal and zero change. No one punished. Nothing. Hauper says, I was less manic about Trump's chances than most because I expected the deep state would essentially do what it did to hamstring him. Part of that was from reading him. Anran says, yes, that is something many, including Kevin, didn't fully appreciate. What was that? About Trump's chances? I predicted right from the very beginning that he was going to have a very serious problem in staffing his administration, in cabinet ministers and aides, for the reason that James Burnham explained in The Machiavellians, that when an elite falls, it is typically replaced by an alternative elite that's been waiting in the wings. Since 1945, it has been determined that politics is dead. Now, Trump changed that. Trump and Brexit changed that. But if politics is dead and everyone has to believe in the same things, then there's not going to be an alternative elite. So Trump was hamstrung. You say, oh, he picked this clown and that clown and all these people who turned out to be traitors. Well, you're not going to drag in people off the street to be cabinet ministers or senior political aides. No offense, 11, but you didn't think the 11.3 stuff could happen? 11.3? Is that 1.6? I don't know what 11.3 refers to. Okay. Let's see. What else do we have here? It's one thing, people marching. People marching accomplishes nothing. Okay. We saw that in England when Tony Blair was prime minister. 500,000 or 600,000 people on two separate occasions marched all the way down to London, to Hyde Park, against the banning of blood sports. And they later, similar, in 2003, marched against the invasion of Iraq. And the attitude of the British government was, what are you going to do about it? Huh? What are you going to do about it? Nothing. That's what you're going to do about it. What are you going to do? Storm Parliament? We'll shoot you down. Farmers withdrawing their labor and others withdrawing their labor and blocking transportation and the like, that is far more serious. Che Blatarski says, after seeing a little bit of Joey Depends' performance today, I don't know how much longer this farce can be continued. Mercurius Olika said, having your fridge on the internet. Yes, one of my brothers was telling me that he had to buy a new washing machine, and he's instructed how he had to connect his washing machine to the internet. What possible reason would there be to connect one's washing machine to the internet? Oh, to update the software? Why does a washing machine need software to be updated? It's just another excuse for, your washing machine and your dryer and your refrigerator and your stove are now all spying on you. But that's an awful lot of data. Have you seen the size of these server farms? They can collect everything, and they can write programs to identify patterns. This was a big plot point on the HBO series Silicon Valley, which I greatly enjoyed. The idea that we're being surveilled at all times, even in our hearth and home. The Internet of Wings, says Chogan 666. Okay. One of the cops is that their whole culture is crime. Dr. Dead Name. Okay. No, I mean the life in America's inner cities is so horrific that again one doesn't want to contemplate it. Okay, we get these rallies against gun violence. Oh, the guns have become sentient. Of course, that's not an original observation. Oh, we'll just get rid of the guns. We'll have gun buybacks, and then more guns will be brought in. So, hello to Ogan's Iron. I still can't believe they passed those laws in the Netherlands beyond farmers. Don't Dutch people care about this? Do they not care? Years ago, I was reading reports of, Muslim difficulties in Delft. And, I remember seeing Delft in the remake of Nosferatu. And I went online to see pictures of Delft. And I thought, this is arguably the most beautiful city in the world. Why would you let these people in and wreck it? Why would you do that? Maybe it's because, we're not capable of building cities like Delft anymore. So we regard them a little suspiciously or even with hatred. Oh, these people from the past, they think they're the boss of me. They think they're better than me. Hello to Phil the Kill. And I'm going to wrap it up right now, as it is 6:01. And so that is the KMG show for Friday and for this week. Thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, you may make a donation directly to the live stream via Interac, assuming Interac ever works again, at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this benediction. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.